Illinois, 1992, a quiet Midwestern town surrounded by cornfields and college dreams. When 22-year-old art student Emily Hartman vanished one rainy night, her disappearance left a hole in the heart of her community. For decades, her case sat unsolved until a single strand of DNA shattered years of silence. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Because what investigators uncovered nearly 30 years later changed everything. In the early 1990s, Champaign, Illinois, was a college town that moved at a gentle rhythm. Rows of brick storefronts, family diners, and quiet backstreets defined a community where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Within that calm, 22-year-old Emily Hartman lived what appeared to be an ordinary and hopeful young life. She was studying fine arts at the University of Illinois, known among her peers for her soft-spoken kindness and a talent that made colors seem to breathe on canvas. Emily's world revolved around creativity. Her small apartment, tucked above a corner bookstore near Green Street, was more studio than home. The walls were lined with canvases, half-finished sketches taped beside postcards from art museums. Empty paint tubes rolled across the hardwood floor. In the corner sat a rickety easel splattered with every shade of blue imaginable. Her friend said she could spend hours capturing the way sunlight hit old brick or how rain turned streets into mirrors. Her parents, Margaret and John Hartman, visited often from Peoria. They were proud Midwesterners, steady, hard-working, grounded in faith. Every few weekends, they'd arrive with homemade casseroles and groceries, filling her fridge as they listened to her talk about color theory, studio critiques, and her dream of teaching art after graduation. Emily was their only child, their pride, their hope. Life in Champaign then was simpler. Without the constant buzz of cell phones or the glow of social media, people lingered over coffee and trusted their neighborhoods. Emily waitressed part-time at a local cafe near campus, where she'd chat with regulars and occasionally draw quick portraits of them on napkins. Her co-workers teased her gently. "You're going to be famous one day, Hartman." But even amid the normalcy, there were fleeting moments of unease that no one paid attention to at the time. Emily once mentioned to a friend that she felt someone had followed her as she walked home from the art building after dark. "Probably just nerves," her friend replied. Another time, she received a late-night call at her apartment, silence on the other end before a soft click. She hung up and laughed it off, blaming it on pranksters or cross lines. In 1992, strange calls weren't yet considered warnings. Her roommate, a fellow art student named Denise, noticed Emily locking the windows more often and double-checking the door at night. "You okay?" she'd ask, and Emily would smile faintly, insisting she was fine. She always tried to see the best in people, assuming the world was mostly good, that danger belonged to stories, not real life. Around campus, Emily was known for her kindness. She volunteered at a local children's art program on weekends, teaching kids to mix colors and encouraging them to paint how they feel, not what they see. To her professors, she was a bright light with quiet determination. One called her a rare blend of talent and soul. As autumn deepened, Champaign streets filled with amber leaves and cool air. Students prepared for midterms. The cafes grew busier, and Emily's senior project consumed her time, a mixed-media installation exploring beauty in imperfection. She often stayed late in the art building, headphones in, unaware that others noticed her routine. On the surface, it was the picture of an ordinary college life, small struggles, creative dreams, steady friendships. Yet beneath that peaceful veneer, something unseen was already circling. The faint worry that had once seemed harmless would soon become something far more sinister. Because while Emily painted her final canvas under the flicker of fluorescent light, someone else was watching, waiting. Who was watching Emily? And why would her ordinary college life soon turn into a nightmare? October 17th, 1992, a cold, misty Saturday night in Champaign, Illinois. The campus of the University of Illinois had mostly gone quiet after homecoming weekend festivities. Street lights glowed dimly through the fog as leaves skittered across the empty sidewalks. Inside the art building, the faint hum of a ventilation fan echoed down the halls. That night, 22-year-old Emily Hartman stayed late, finishing the final touches on her mixed media project, a centerpiece for her senior art showcase. Friends remembered seeing her that afternoon, excited, energized. She had talked about color blending, about maybe grabbing coffee after she wrapped up. But when evening came, the weather turned colder. Most students had already gone home. Security cameras were limited in 1992, a single one near the main entrance, grainy and unreliable. Around 10:15 p.m., Emily signed out from the studio, packed her brushes, and stepped into the night carrying her sketch portfolio and a small shoulder bag. Her apartment was only a 10-minute walk away. She never made it back. When her roommate, Denise, woke up the next morning, she immediately knew something was wrong. Emily's bed hadn't been slept in. Her jacket was still draped over the chair, and her keys were missing. But the strangest detail was the sketchbook, the one she never went anywhere without, left sitting open on the kitchen table, as if she had planned to come right back. Denise called friends, then the campus security office. Within hours, the Champaign Police Department launched a missing person report. Emily's parents, John and Margaret, were notified before noon. They packed an overnight bag and made the 2-hour drive from Peoria, their hearts sinking with each passing mile. Margaret later recalled, "I just kept thinking she must have lost track of time, that she'd walk in the door any second." By afternoon, volunteers gathered to help search the surrounding area, the wooded trails behind the art building, nearby bus stops, and the stretch of road leading to her apartment. Flyers with her smiling photo, holding a paintbrush in her hand, went up on lampposts and store windows. Students handed them out on campus corners, and local news stations began covering the story by nightfall. Detectives interviewed anyone who might have seen her. One student recalled hearing a car door slam around 10:30 p.m. near the art building. Another mentioned a dark sedan idling by the curb with its headlights off. Police checked parking records and canvassed nearby lots, but there were no witnesses who could identify the driver or license plate. The search widened beyond campus. Officers combed through wooded areas, drainage ditches, and open fields along County Road 15. Helicopters hovered overhead, using infrared cameras to scan the terrain. For 3 days, dozens of volunteers worked in the damp autumn air, calling Emily's name through the fog. Every hour that passed made hope harder to hold. At a press conference, the police chief described the disappearance as uncharacteristic and deeply troubling. Emily wasn't the type to vanish without word. There were no signs of struggle in the art building, no evidence left behind, no witnesses who saw her after 10:15. Rumors began circulating around campus, stories of strangers seen following students, of an unfamiliar car near the dorms in recent weeks. Fear spread quickly. Female students began walking in pairs after dark, and campus patrols doubled their coverage. Back at the Hartman home, the phone rang constantly. Tips, false sightings, and cruel prank calls blended into endless waiting. Emily's parents stayed in Champaign, spending nights in her apartment, hoping for a knock on the door that never came. And then, late on the third day of searching, a deputy found something, a single shoe, tangled in tall grass near the Salt Fork River, several miles east of campus. It matched the shoes Emily had been wearing that night. When the search finally led beyond the campus, what investigators would find left even seasoned officers shaken. 3 cold, sleepless nights had passed since Emily vanished. Hope was slipping away when, on the morning of October 20th, 1992, a jogger taking his usual route along the Salt Fork River noticed something out of place, a lone shoe, tangled in river weeds near a patch of flattened grass. At first, he thought it was debris from the recent rainstorm, but when he stepped closer, his stomach turned. It wasn't just a shoe, it was Emily's, the same pair her roommate had described in the missing persons report. Within an hour, the banks of the river were crawling with police, dogs, and volunteers. As the search line moved downstream, the current caught on something pale beneath the surface. It took seconds for the awful truth to surface. Emily's body, partially submerged, her wrists bound, her coat ripped open by the force of the water. Officers shouted for tarps, evidence bags, anything to preserve what little they could. But the autumn storm had done its damage. Mud, leaves, and rainwater had erased nearly every trace the killer left behind. Detectives photographed the scene, stepping carefully through the soaked terrain. A single-tire track curved near the embankment, too deep to be recent, too faint to trace. Beside it, they collected a fragment of dark fabric, possibly from a glove or a sleeve. But there were no footprints, no blood trail, nothing that could point to a suspect. The coroner's report came later that evening. Emily had likely died the same night she went missing. She had suffered blunt force trauma, followed by asphyxiation. There were signs of violent struggle, bruising on her wrists, defensive marks along her forearms. But beyond that, the evidence was thin. No fingerprints, no clear DNA, just silence. Word of the discovery spread fast. By sunset, hundreds gathered near the riverbank, holding candles, photographs, and handmade posters. The air was heavy with disbelief. Emily wasn't just another missing student. She was a friend, a classmate, a daughter who'd left her mark through art and kindness. Now, the bright colors she painted with had been replaced by gray skies and grief. Police faced mounting pressure from both the university and the public. Tips flooded in, a suspicious man seen near campus, a dark sedan speeding out of town, strange noises heard near the art building that night. But every lead unraveled. Some were well-meaning, but mistaken. Others were deliberate hoaxes, sent anonymously to throw investigators off course. Detective Carl Benson, leading the case, described the frustration years later. It felt like chasing shadows. Every time we thought we had something, it slipped away. Investigators began to re-examine Emily's last days. Who had she spoken to in the art lab that night? Had she trusted someone enough to walk with them? Her professors, friends, and even ex-boyfriends were questioned repeatedly. Each interview led to more confusion. Everyone had an alibi, or seemed to. Meanwhile, the media descended on Champaign. News anchors called it the riverbank murder. Cameras filmed the flickering vigils and tearful interviews. But for Emily's family, no headline could capture their loss. Her mother's voice broke during one press conference. "Whoever did this, please, just tell us why." As days turned into weeks, the case began to stall. Forensic labs combed through every piece of evidence, the tire tracks, the fabric, the shoelace bindings, but nothing matched anyone in the database. In 1992, DNA technology was still in its infancy. The samples they did recover were too degraded to identify. Winter crept in, and the river froze over. Search efforts dwindled, and media attention shifted to newer stories. But inside the police station, a few detectives refused to close the file. Benson pinned Emily's photograph to the board above his desk, a silent promise that the case wasn't over. Because somewhere in Champaign County, Emily's killer was still out there, maybe blending in, maybe smiling among them. And as the snow began to fall, one haunting question lingered in every investigator's mind. Had the killer truly vanished forever, or was he hiding in plain sight? By the start of 1993, the murder of 22-year-old art student Emily Hart had become a wound that refused to heal in Champaign County, Illinois. The case dominated headlines, talk shows, and campus whispers. Fear ran deep. Parents called their children nightly. Strangers eyed one another with suspicion. And inside the sheriff's department, pressure mounted like never before. Detectives formed a task force, 10 officers rotating through sleepless shifts, poring over statements and crime scene photos. They canvassed every inch of the area between the university's art lab and the Salt Fork River. Door-to-door interviews stretched for weeks. Local farmers recalled the sound of an engine near the river that night, but details blurred in memory. A security guard mentioned seeing a dark sedan circling campus, matching the earlier witness account. Yet nothing solid stuck. Investigators chased lead after lead. A janitor who'd been fired weeks earlier for inappropriate behavior, a drifter spotted near the riverbank, and even an art professor rumored to have shown too much interest in Emily's work. Each suspect was questioned, fingerprinted, cleared. Frustration grew. The case that once seemed solvable was slipping into uncertainty. Forensics in 1993 could only go so far. DNA testing existed, but it required substantial samples, something the storm had washed away. Still, the evidence that did remain was sealed carefully in brown envelopes. Fibers from Emily's coat, a faint partial fingerprint lifted from her sketchbook, and a single strand of hair found near the bindings on her wrists. At the time, none of it could identify a killer. But detectives made a silent vow to preserve it, believing that one day, science might give Emily a voice again. Detective Carl Benson, who had led the river search, refused to give up. He built a timeline on a wall-sized board in his office, pins, strings, and Polaroids connecting people and places. But every path circled back to nothing. The lack of motive was baffling. Emily had no enemies, no criminal connections, and no history of conflict. It looked like a random act, the kind that leaves detectives restless for decades. Meanwhile, the emotional toll on Emily's family deepened. Her parents moved temporarily to Champaign, speaking with reporters, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. "Someone knows something," her mother said through tears at a televised press conference. "Please say it before it's too late." But tips soon turned to silence. As weeks turned to months, the media frenzy faded. What remained was a quiet unease. Campus security doubled its patrols. Students traveled in pairs, and art-building curfews were enforced. Even the river trail, once popular among joggers, became deserted. It wasn't just grief that haunted the town. It was the realization that a killer had vanished without trace. Inside the sheriff's office, morale was slipping. Some officers were reassigned to newer cases. Others quietly admitted that they had run out of leads. The thick file labeled Emily Hart, 92 to 1034, was moved to a cabinet, its edges frayed from overuse. Detective Benson, however, kept one copy on his desk, revisiting it late at night when the office lights dimmed. "We didn't solve it," he told a local reporter years later. "We just ran out of time." By late 1993, the investigation slowed to a crawl. The case was technically open but functionally frozen. There were no suspects, no breakthroughs, just a family mourning a daughter and a town learning to live with fear. And yet, while most people moved on, one family refused. Emily's parents never stopped calling the sheriff's office, never stopped sending letters, never stopped hoping. Because they believed, deep down, that silence doesn't mean forgotten. But what happens when that silence lasts not just for months, but for decades? And when one grieving family refuses to let Emily's memory fade, how far will they go to force the case back into the light? By the late 1990s, the name Emily Hartman had begun to fade from headlines and public memory. Her framed senior portrait still hung in the University of Illinois art building, but most new students walked past it without knowing the story. Inside the Champaign County Sheriff's Department, her case sat buried in a drawer labeled Cold Cases, unresolved. The folder was thick, its edges yellowed, and its contents marked by disappointment. Emily's parents, Harold and Diane Hartman, never stopped waiting for a phone call that might finally bring answers. Every October, the month she vanished, reopened the wound. Local reporters would run short anniversary pieces. 20 years later, who killed Emily Hartman? Then, silence again. No arrests, no justice, just time, cruel, heavy, and unrelenting. Through the late 1990s, several detectives revisited the file, each hoping to be the one who solved what others couldn't. But the truth was simple. The technology wasn't ready. The biological evidence collected from the riverbank had degraded after exposure to rain and mud. The partial fingerprint lifted from her sketchbook was too incomplete to compare in the state database. The single hair strand, the piece they once called the thread of hope, was too small to test under 1990s DNA methods. By 2001, most of the original investigators had retired. Some quietly admitted they doubted the case would ever be solved. For the Hartmans, that uncertainty was worse than death. Every holiday season, Diane still set an extra plate at the dinner table. "It's for Emily," she'd whisper, "just in case she's watching." The 2000s brought advances in forensics, But each time they tried to reprocess the evidence, labs returned the same verdict: insufficient for analysis. By 2008, Emily's file joined hundreds of other cold cases in Illinois' unsolved archives. She became another name in a long list of lost futures. Still, not everyone had given up. In 2012, a new detective was assigned to the cold case unit, Detective Ryan Cole, a younger officer with a quiet determination and a background in digital forensics. Where others saw dead ends, he saw untapped opportunity. Cole believed old cases weren't unsolvable, just waiting for the right tools. He started by digitizing every page of Emily's file. Handwritten notes became searchable PDFs. Old evidence logs were uploaded into a modern case management system. For the first time in 2 decades, Emily's name appeared again in active workflow reports. Cole re-examined photos of the crime scene, the fiber reports, the old Polaroids. He flagged inconsistencies, missing timestamps, misfiled witness statements, even a few overlooked lab notes. Then he focused on what most had given up on: the evidence itself. By 2012, next-generation DNA testing could extract usable profiles from fragments smaller than a pinhead. Cole contacted the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, requesting a full reevaluation of the hair and fibers. The response was cautious: "We can try, but no guarantees." While the new testing began, Emily's memory quietly resurfaced in Champaign. Former classmates, now in their 40s, organized an online remembrance page. Photos of Emily's artwork circulated again, her sketches shared with captions like "Gone too soon, but never forgotten." Her friends gathered that October, candles flickering along the same riverbank where she was found. Her mother spoke softly to a reporter, saying, "We just want peace. We just want to know." No one knew that, for the first time in 20 years, the case file wasn't gathering dust. It was back on an active desk. And deep inside a sterile state lab, a single fragment of hair was undergoing a process that hadn't existed when Emily died. What if the peace her family prayed for wasn't coming through time, but through science? By 2020, Illinois had begun a new statewide cold case initiative, a program built on the idea that science could do what time had failed to. Funded by federal grants, the project aimed to revisit unsolved murders stretching back decades, applying modern genetic genealogy and high-resolution DNA sequencing. Among the hundreds of files submitted for reevaluation was one long considered hopeless: the 1992 murder of 22-year-old art student Emily Hartman. When the evidence box was opened inside the Illinois State Police Forensic Lab, technicians handled it like a relic. The contents were familiar to anyone who'd studied the file: Emily's torn jacket, a few sealed swabs, and a fragile paper envelope labeled "hair fragment, riverbank." Earlier generations of scientists had tried and failed to pull a usable profile from it. But this time, things were different. Using a method called whole genome amplification, forensic analysts extracted genetic material from the microscopic root. The process took weeks. Each strand of DNA was replicated, purified, and digitized, a sequence built from fragments smaller than dust. When the results loaded onto the screen, the room fell silent. For the first time in 28 years, there was a partial male DNA profile. It wasn't complete, but it was enough. The lab uploaded the data into a genealogical database, the same type that had helped crack dozens of infamous cold cases nationwide. Within days, a web of distant relatives appeared, forming a genetic tree that traced back to a handful of families in east-central Illinois. One name stood out. The data pointed toward descendants of a local lineage that had lived near Champaign for generations. Working backward, analysts narrowed the possibilities: brothers, cousins, nephews. Then they cross-referenced the names with the original 1992 police interviews. There, buried on page 247 of the case file, was one familiar name: Daniel R. Whitmore, then a 27-year-old maintenance worker who had been questioned early in the investigation but released for lack of evidence. At the time, Whitmore had claimed he'd been home the night Emily disappeared. His alibi was unverified, but without physical evidence, detectives couldn't hold him. Over the years, he'd built a quiet life, a steady job, a family, and no serious criminal record. But now, the DNA trail had looped back to his door. Detective Ryan Cole and his partner decided to move cautiously. They didn't want to alert Whitmore too soon. They initiated discreet surveillance, watching his routine, noting his stops at the same coffee shop every morning. In mid-June 2020, while Whitmore sat in his truck checking his phone, detectives retrieved a discarded coffee cup from a nearby trash bin. The item was rushed to the state lab for testing. Weeks later, the call came. The technician's voice was calm, but carried weight. "We got him." The DNA from the coffee cup matched the partial profile from Emily Hartman's case, a 99.98% certainty. Nearly 3 decades after the murder, science had spoken with near-perfect precision. Detectives prepared a search and arrest warrant under total secrecy. They reviewed the old case notes one last time, the dark sedan scene idling near the art building, the unverified alibi, the pattern of behavior that no one had noticed back then. All of it lined up now with terrifying clarity. Early one September morning, unmarked vehicles rolled into a quiet cul-de-sac on the outskirts of Champaign. The man who opened the door appeared older, heavier, gray-haired, the kind of neighbor no one suspected of harboring a secret. But behind him, investigators would soon uncover something chilling. When detectives finally stepped inside, what they found would leave even seasoned officers speechless. Spring 2021, Illinois. Nearly 3 decades after Emily Hartman's murder, the phone call investigators have been waiting to make finally went through. The DNA match was undeniable. With a signed arrest warrant in hand, detectives moved quietly through the tree-lined streets of suburban Champaign, hearts pounding with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. The name on the warrant: Thomas Greer, age 54, a man who, for nearly 30 years, had lived a life that appeared painfully ordinary. Greer worked as a maintenance technician at the University of Illinois back in the early 90s. His duties had included the art building, the very place where Emily spent much of her time sketching, painting, and preparing for her senior showcase. Back then, his name had surfaced briefly during interviews, but without evidence, investigators couldn't make anything stick. He was cleared, and his file collected dust in the archives. When news of his arrest broke, the entire community froze. This was a man who had attended neighborhood barbecues, helped fix church plumbing, and coached youth baseball. Married, 2 children, never a criminal record. For 30 years, Thomas Greer blended into the background, the kind of man people trusted to change light bulbs or shovel snow. Detectives recalled the moment they approached his modest home. The air was still, the only sound the crunch of gravel underfoot. Greer answered the door in a faded flannel shirt, confusion flickering across his face as he saw the badges. When they told him why they were there, he didn't argue, just stood in silence, his hands trembling as the cuffs clicked shut. At the station, interrogation began with routine questions, his time at the university, his recollections of that spring in 1992. He shrugged often, said he barely remembered her. But the investigators knew what they had. On the table lay the lab reports, a 99.98% DNA match. The forensic trail told a story science couldn't fake. The room fell silent when detectives slid the photographs across the table. The evidence kit, the genealogy chart, the discarded coffee cup that sealed his fate. For a long moment, Greer said nothing. He stared at the images, jaw tight, eyes wet but unblinking. "This doesn't prove anything," he finally muttered, but his voice cracked on the last word. The detectives knew the denial wouldn't last forever. When the press conference hit local news stations that afternoon, it felt like time itself paused in Illinois. Sheriff Daniels stood before a wall of microphones and cameras, the Hartman family seated quietly in the front row. "After nearly 30 years," he announced, "Emily's voice has finally been heard." The words carried weight, decades of frustration, sleepless nights, and unanswered prayers condensed into a single sentence. For Emily's parents, the arrest was both a relief and a reopening of old wounds. Her mother clutched a framed photo of Emily taken just weeks before her death. The same gentle smile, the same spark that had carried her through art school. "We waited so long," she whispered to reporters. "Now, maybe she can rest." Neighbors of Greer expressed disbelief. "He was just an ordinary guy," one said. "Always polite, always helpful. You never think something like this could happen here." But investigators weren't surprised. As they combed through university records, they uncovered old disciplinary notes about Greer, small incidents of inappropriate behavior around female students, quietly dismissed as misunderstandings. At the time, no one connected the dots. Now, those forgotten records painted a darker picture, one of opportunity, proximity, and a pattern that had slipped through the cracks of 1990s policing. As the trial date approached, journalists and true crime enthusiasts began circling the case, calling it one of the most significant cold case breakthroughs in Illinois history. But beneath the headlines, one haunting question lingered. After all these years, would justice truly bring peace, or would reopening the past reveal even deeper scars yet to heal? By early 2023, anticipation gripped Champaign County. After decades of silence, the Illinois 1992 cold case that once baffled detectives had finally reached its day in court. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. Every seat was filled, journalists, old classmates, retired officers, and townspeople who still remembered the fear that followed Emily Hartman's murder. Nearly 31 years after her death, Thomas Greer faced justice. When the trial began, prosecutors framed it as a triumph of perseverance and science. They presented the story of how new DNA technology had revived forgotten evidence, how a degraded hair follicle and clothing fibers, once useless to investigators, became the very key to unlocking the truth. On the screen before the jury, photographs of the evidence appeared side by side with modern lab results. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence. Science doesn't forget. Time can't erase DNA. Greer sat expressionless, his gray hair slicked back, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His defense attorney argued contamination, claiming the samples had been mishandled and that the chain of custody spanning 3 decades was unreliable. They questioned the validity of genealogical DNA tracing, calling it a shot in the dark. But when forensic experts took the stand, the technical precision of their testimony left little doubt. They explained how minute DNA strands extracted from Emily's clothing were consistent with only one individual, Thomas Greer. The prosecution built a meticulous narrative, linking Greer's employment at the University of Illinois, his proximity to the art building, and his unexplained absences around the time Emily disappeared. Witnesses testified to seeing his maintenance van near the art studio late one evening. A retired campus guard recalled filing a report after finding Greer wandering near closed classrooms, though nothing came of it back then. Then came the emotional weight, Emily's parents. Now in their 70s, their movements slow, their eyes heavy with decades of grief. They took the stand to speak about their daughter. Her mother's voice trembled as she held up a photo of Emily taken the week before her death. "She was gentle," she said, "and she trusted people too easily." The courtroom fell silent. Even some jurors wiped tears as the mother's words echoed through the room. Throughout the proceedings, Greer never broke. He rarely looked up, never apologized, and refused to testify in his own defense. His attorneys urged the jury to remember the fallibility of memory and evidence. But the forensic proof told a clearer story than any witness ever could. After 3 grueling weeks of testimony, closing arguments began. The prosecution spoke of justice delayed, but not denied, how technology had finally given Emily a voice. The defense leaned into doubt, reminding jurors that 30 years had passed, that science could be wrong. But when the jury left to deliberate, few in the gallery had any question about the outcome. They were gone for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood, voice steady, guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily's father lowered his head, tears falling into his trembling hands. Her mother clutched the cross around her neck. The judge's voice broke slightly as he pronounced the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Outside, cameras flashed in the cold Illinois air. Reporters crowded around Sheriff Daniels, whose voice carried both pride and exhaustion. Time didn't protect him. Science caught him. But as the crowd dispersed and the courthouse doors closed, one question still haunted those who'd followed the case for decades. How could someone capable of such violence, someone who lived among them, smiled at them, helped their children, hide in plain sight for so long? Years after the arrest and conviction of Thomas Greer, Emily Hartman's story remained etched into the heart of Champaign, Illinois. Her case, once a haunting mystery that chilled the community, had become a symbol of persistence, justice, and the power of modern forensic science. It demonstrated that even decades-old crimes could be solved. That time was no barrier when determination met technological innovation. For investigators, journalists, and families of other victims, Emily's case was a beacon of hope, proof that cold cases did not have to remain in the shadows. The Hartman family, who had endured nearly 30 years of grief and uncertainty, sought to transform their sorrow into something constructive. They established the Hartman Art Scholarship at the University of Illinois, a fund to support young, talented artists pursuing their dreams like Emily's that had been abruptly stolen. Each year, students applied with portfolios full of sketches, paintings, and mixed media projects, unaware of the tragic story behind scholarship. But when recipients learned of Emily's life and passion, many described feeling a profound sense of connection, a responsibility to honor the young woman who had once walked the same campus paths and imagined the same future. Beyond the scholarship, Emily's case sparked broader institutional changes. The university updated campus security policies, adding more lighting, surveillance, and emergency call stations. Law enforcement agencies in Illinois expanded their cold case divisions, inspired by the success of Emily's investigation. Her case helped validate forensic genealogy, once viewed skeptically, showing that it could provide reliable leads that traditional investigations might miss. Across the state, other cold cases were reopened with renewed hope, each investigation quietly fueled by the blueprint Emily's tragic story had created. Even today, students and community members pause at the small memorial bench near the art building, where Emily once spent afternoons sketching. Flowers, notes, and painted stones often appear there, tokens of remembrance from those who never knew her personally. The bench has become a quiet symbol of resilience, a place to reflect on creativity interrupted, innocence lost, and justice ultimately achieved. Visitors often speak of a subtle feeling of connection, as if Emily's presence still lingers in the campus corridors, watching over the next generation of artists. For the Hartman family, life has slowly resumed a fragile sense of normalcy. They can now sleep more peacefully at night, comforted that Emily's story was not forgotten, that her murder was no longer a mystery, and that her legacy continues to inspire. Yet, even with the case officially closed, the emotional echoes of the past remain. Friends who had mourned with the family, classmates who had once lit candles by the riverbank, and neighbors who had feared for their safety, all carry the weight of the story, the memory of a young life lost, and the reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. Ultimately, the legacy of Emily Hartman's case is twofold: a reminder of the resilience of families and communities in the face of tragedy, and a testament to the evolution of justice through science and perseverance. Her art lives on, not only in scholarship recipients' work, but in the consciousness of those who remember her, a quiet, enduring influence. Even as the final file was closed, one truth lingered, whispered to all who follow the paths she once walked. Behind every solved cold case lies a family forever changed, and a community forced to remember. The scars remain, but so too does hope, a lesson written in memory, ink, and human resilience. Nearly 30 years after Emily Hartman's murder, Illinois finally found closure, not through luck, but through unwavering determination and the evolution of science. Her 1992 cold case reminded the world that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Detectives, once limited by outdated tools, proved that patience, empathy, and technology could rewrite history. For Emily's family, the verdict wasn't about vengeance. It was about validation, proof that her life still mattered. The Hartman Art Scholarship now turns pain into purpose, giving other students the chance to create the beauty Emily once envisioned. Her story continues to echo across Illinois courtrooms, classrooms, and hearts, a solemn testament to the resilience of families who never stop seeking truth.